I'm sure many of you have the Elvis Second to None album, in which it states that Elvis was the first to create fan hysteria, the first to be censored, the first to own a private jet. But they forgot one. Elvis was the first to work from home. As many fans know, Elvis's last recordings took place at Graceland in the autumn of 1976. He recorded 16 songs there with his band and the backing vocalists, and they ended up on what turned out to be his last two albums, from Elvis Presley Boulevard, Memphis, Tennessee in 1976, and then in July 1977, his last album, Moody Blue. And in this video, we're going to be looking at this album and asking, did Elvis go out with a bang or a whimper? You've got to have some sympathy for producer Felton Jarvis when it came to making this album. He really didn't have a lot of material to work with. Elvis was contracted to release a certain number of albums and singles every year, so they were going to release an album no matter what. It turns out that Moody Blue was a combination of studio and live tracks. So let's have a look at what's actually on there. The first song is Unchained Melody, a live performance from 1977 recorded on April 24th at Ann Arbor, Michigan. There's another song also from that same concert elsewhere on the album. This is a song that we tend to associate with late live Elvis. It's a pretty intense performance, and I think Elvis was always able to raise himself for this song, even if he wasn't having a particularly good night, at least all the versions I've heard of it. It's quite an old song, actually, going back to 1955. I used to think that Unchained Melody was some obscure technical musical term referring to the song itself, but in actual fact, it comes from a movie called Unchained, hence Unchained Melody. And one of Elvis's heroes, Roy Hamilton, also recorded it in 1955. The second song, If You Love Me, Let Me Know, is also a live recording. It was a big hit for Olivia Newton-John in 1974, and in fact that's the year that Elvis started performing it. The performance that we get here is from 1977, April the 26th at Kalamazoo, so just a couple of days after the Unchained Melody performance. You can also hear some really good rehearsal versions of this song on an FTD CD called From Sunset to Las Vegas. The next song is Little Darling. This one came from the same concert as Unchained Melody, the first song. It's actually a really old song, going back to the 1950s. I think it was the Diamonds who had a big hit with it in 1957, I believe. Elvis apparently just saw it as a little bit of fun, a bit of light relief in his concerts towards the end of his life. He started performing it as early as 1975. I think the earliest version is March 75, and you can hear that on the FTD Big Boss Man CD. But yeah, it's not a particularly serious song. He just has a bit of fun with the spoken part and the falsetto vocals. That one is followed by one of the two really poignant moments on the album. It's a song called He'll Have to Go. It's the only song on this side which was recorded in the studio. Just before I talk about that, actually, I just want to mention that I was recently on a radio show in Australia called For the Love of Elvis. I was invited onto the show by my buddy Grant Banch, who does the show every week, and he asked me to choose some Elvis songs and talk about them, and he played the songs as well, and this song, He'll Have to Go, was one of the songs that I chose. So I'll leave a link in the video description, so if you want, you can go and listen to that radio show. And even if you're not interested in what I have to say, I still recommend you check out the show, because he does a great show every week, plays some really interesting Elvis stuff. For the Love of Elvis. So yeah, back to the song. It turned out to be the last thing that Elvis recorded in a studio environment. So what happened is there was a session scheduled for overnight, October 30th, 31st. The band came, the vocalists came, the engineers came, but Elvis didn't feel like recording. He eventually came down, but then got distracted. They also recorded, the band, before Elvis came down, they recorded this song, and they recorded Jerry Sheff, the bass player's song, There's a Fire Down Below. Sadly, Elvis never got to record his vocal for that part, but he did later overdub his vocal for this song, He'll Have to Go, which is a really good song. I think it was earlier performed by Jim Reeves. It's got a great atmosphere to it, very moody, very sort of smoky feel to it. But it's quite sad for me because like I say, it was the last song that he recorded in a studio setting. But it's also quite sad to think that he overdubbed the last vocal that he ever did. As most fans know, Elvis preferred to record live. There aren't that many songs throughout his career where he recorded the overdub, where he overdubbed the vocals separately. So it's sad to think that the last vocal he did in a studio environment was actually an overdubbed vocal. I wonder if all the musicians had gone by then. It's quite sad really to think of it. The last song on side one is the final live song on the album. It's Let Me Be There. It's a bit of a mystery because it was a song that was included on the recorded live on stage in Memphis album. It's the same version, the one recorded in Memphis in '74. I honestly do not know why Felton Jarvis would include that song here. If anybody knows why, or if anybody has a theory as to why that live version appears here, again, let me know. I imagine it was just a mistake. Anyway, Let Me Be There had been a hit for Olivia Newton-John again in 1973, and Elvis started recording it live from early '74. Maybe Elvis first became aware of Olivia Newton-John before that, when she had another hit in America called If Not For You. That was written by Bob Dylan, a very famous song. Yeah, I would suggest you check out Bob Dylan's own version of that song. It's really good. I think Elvis would have done a good version of that too. Moody Blue is quite unusual for a '70s Elvis album in that there were 2 singles released before the album came out. Typically what would happen is you'd get 10 songs on a '70s studio album, 2 of which were released as a single prior to the album coming out. But in the case of Moody Blue, 4 songs had already appeared on singles. So when you bought the album new, you only got 6 new songs, and all 4 sides of those 2 singles appear on side 2. So it is a pretty strong side 2. The first song is Way Down, and there's a great story about that song in here, Writing for the King, in which the songwriter himself explains how he submitted a demo. He produced a demo himself, singing the lead vocal, and he submitted the demo to RCA for Elvis to record. And Felton Jarvis got in touch with him and says, "This is great, I'm sure Elvis is going to love this." But then nothing happened. Months went by, and so in '77 he submitted the song all over again to RCA, only to get a phone call a few weeks later saying, "Elvis has already recorded this, we don't need it." So you can imagine how thrilled and surprised he was when he found out that his song had already been recorded by Elvis. In Britain, people of my age, we all remember Way Down very well because it wasn't doing particularly well in the charts at the time, but when Elvis died, it shot up to the top and ended up being Elvis's 18th number 1, I think, at the time. On the flip side of Way Down, we got an old song, Pledging My Love. This one dates all the way back to 1954 and Johnny Ace's recording of it. And Elvis's idol, Roy Hamilton, also did a version of it. And in fact, Elvis himself was rumoured to have recorded it live as far back as 1955. Imagine being at a concert way back before Elvis became famous and hearing him do that. Many people recorded this song before Elvis, and many people have done it since. Next we come to a real Elvis classic, Moody Blue. This was a number 1 country hit for Elvis in America at the time, and it was also a big top 10 hit in the UK as well. It was written by Mark James, of course, who also wrote Suspicious Minds, perhaps Elvis's most popular song. And I particularly like the moment when it comes in the film This Is Elvis. It's just a very joyful moment when it comes in towards the beginning of the film. And I've got to say that the album as a whole, it has a more upbeat feel than the From Elvis Presley Boulevard album. It's got more of a typical sort of up and down, fast and slow, light and dark sort of a mood to it. The next song on the album is the flip side to Moody Blue, that's She Thinks I Still Care. And this is one of my most favourite songs on this album. Not just the performance, but the lyrics as well. It kind of reminds me of Just Tell Her Jim Said Hello, which Elvis did back in 1962. A song about a man who's desperately trying to convince himself that he no longer loves the woman, but at the end of the song he falls apart and realizes that he still very much does love her. Lyrically, I think this is a bit of a downer. It's more reminiscent of the Boulevard album, but overall, I think this album, the lyrics too, are a lot more, what would you say? I think with love songs, which, let's face it, Elvis tended to record mostly love songs in his life, they can go one of three ways lyrically. You've either got the sort of happy clappy, everything's wonderful type of love song, or at the other extreme, you've got the my world's fallen apart, I can't live without you type of song. And then in the middle, you've got these songs which are more subtle lyrically. You're not quite sure which way they're going to go. And with the Moody Blue album, there are quite a lot of songs like that that are stuck in the middle. This, She Thinks I Still Care, is not one of those, of course, but most of the other songs are kind of like that. The lyrics are just somewhere in the middle. They could go either way. If you'd bought this album at the end of August 1977, or say early September 77, it will have struck you that It's Easy for You was the last song on the last Elvis Presley album. It's a shame that a song about regret should end Elvis's last album, because it does make you wonder, did Elvis himself have any regrets? Another song, speaking of regrets, another song that was available to Felton Jarvis at the time was the studio version of My Way, which I believe was recorded way back in 71. But I think that would have been unbearably sad to end at the last Elvis album with My Way. And now the end is near, and so I faced the final curtain. That would have made it pretty much unlistenable to many fans, I think, to have that as the last song. Fortunately, he didn't choose it. Another song that was available to him also was the studio version of For the Good Times, recorded in 72. Perhaps he didn't choose these songs because they were associated with Elvis's live performances. Thinking about it now, if I could choose a song to end the album of the 10 songs that are on there, I'd probably go with Way Down, because let's face it, it was the rocking songs that got Elvis noticed in the first place. They were the type of songs that led to him becoming famous. And although he didn't do many rockers in the 70s, he did show, like with Way Down, that he still could do it when he wanted to. So that was Moody Blue, Elvis's last album, a combination of live and studio recordings, only a few of which were from 1977. In that sense, it's kind of reminiscent of That's the Way It Is, because it has that combination of live and studio recordings. And just as Elvis was filming for That's the Way It Is in 1970, so his concerts were being filmed in 1977 for the TV special Elvis in Concert, which came out after he died. Unfortunately, Felton Jarvis didn't really have a lot to play with when he was compiling this Moody Blue album, unlike 1970 when RCA had a ton of material to work with. So for that reason, it would be a brave fan who would argue that Moody Blue is as good as That's the Way It Is. But having said that, it's not his worst album of the 70s by any means. It's not his best, it's not his worst. Maybe like the lyrics, it's kind of somewhere in the middle. So what do you think of Elvis's last album? Did you buy it at the time? What were your memories of hearing it in 1977? Let me know in the comments section below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Cheers.